And we are live. Hi, Alex. Hi, Viraj. How are you?
I'm good. How are you?
I'm doing very well. Welcome.
Doing well.
Yes. Thank you both for coming in. We have an exciting talk ahead of us. It's been something that I've been waiting to have for quite a while. So welcome, chat. Welcome. I hope you're all doing well. We have 40 people already. Great. Awesome. Ashmit has early attendance. Ashmit, you will be getting extra marks today. Vedant, welcome. Deepak, Miss Nonchalant, welcome. Chaitali, Murtaza, Ishan, Nika, Mahmood, Captain America, hello. We are here today to talk about climate change, and I'm so happy that both of you could come in. Can you just introduce yourselves? Tell the chat what have you been up to? How did you get to this point? What got you into climate change? Alex, I think we'll start with you.
Yeah, so I am a second year PhD student in geography at UCLA. I study the sociology of climate change, so how climate change is impacting communities, mostly in urban settings in America. And I got my master's in environmental change from Oxford.
Okay.
And there I was focusing on climate communication and how people understand and respond to information about climate change.
Right.
And I started working on climate change because it concerns me very deeply.
As it should all of us. So you're working on climate change communication specifically.
So that was my master's thesis at Oxford.
Okay.
Now I work a little bit more on climate sociology.
Okay. So what is climate sociology exactly?
Yeah, so it's basically trying to understand how the impacts of how people are responding to the impacts of climate change,
Right.
how it's impacting communities, and how governments are starting to take action in adapting to the impacts of climate change locally.
So both governments and other public bodies, how are they responding to climate change?
Yes, and also communities and individuals.
Right. Okay. Brilliant. Viraj, just introduce yourselves. Tell me how you got till here.
Yeah. Thank you for having us. This is obviously, and I know I speak for myself and Alexandria also how passionate we are about our work. So any chance we get to just blabber about it, we are happy to do it.
Just
So
hang on. So I think your volume was low. No. So Viraj, I think you are okay. Alex's volume was low. I think Alex, you may be just naturally soft-spoken, but you can just increase your volume a little. Viraj's volume is fine. Chat is saying. So we have a very helpful chat. They keep giving me a lot
I'll
of
talk
feedback.
louder. Is that
Yes,
better?
that is.
Can you
I
hear
think.
me now?
Chat, can you confirm if Alex's voice is better now?
we are talking about climate change, Alexandria. You have to shout.
Yeah, so before, when I was talking to Viraj the last time, he said that Alex can get really passionate and loud about this. So I'm counting on that. Yes, okay. Now you're okay, Alex. Viraj, continue, please.
Yeah. So right now, I am a second year PhD student at UCLA as well. My program is in environment and sustainability. It's a interdisciplinary program. We have an institute where people work on a lot of different areas broadly in sustainability and climate change. My work right now is focused on mainly transportation. So I look at electric vehicles, their economics, their policies to promote electric vehicles, and so on.
Right.
Before this, I was working in New Delhi at a think tank called ICRIER. It's a policy research institute. I was a couple of years. We worked on a bunch of different projects, again broadly in climate change sustainability areas. Some related to technology, some related to renewable energy jobs, some related to waste management, just like bunch of other different areas. Before that, I'd gotten my master's in energy economics from Rice University.
Okay.
And I also, like, my undergrad is in engineering. So I have fairly interdisciplinary background, and I continue to sort of be in the middle of
Many
two
things.
different disciplines. Yeah, like I'm sort of like jack of multiple trades, not all, but multiple.
And
But
in
yeah,
your free time, you also surf.
Outdoors mainly. Yeah, I love
Viraj is
outdoors.
a very cool surfer.
Yeah, I
He's
saw
a
the pictures.
California boy.
No, no,
Yeah,
it just yeah, I love outdoors.
yeah,
Just hiking, climbing, or surfing. It
yeah.
just
So
uh,
that fits in with a climate change.
yeah,
It gives you a very very personal reason to save all this.
yeah, yeah, exactly. I love this planet, and I guess I try to the
Yeah.
help keep it the way it is. So
I like what you said about sustainability because when you said that, I realized that that is such an important factor because on the one hand, we are talking about the seriousness of the outcomes of climate change, but we also want to talk about the sustainability of our actions. So, if say we are going to make corrections, how sustainable is it? So can we make corrections that will keep human comfort at the level that it is and make changes? So we are not giving up on our comfort, but we are also ensuring that our climate is better off. That is what is ideal. That is an ideal solution for everyone. And I like the word sustainability because it sort of implies that does come into picture. Like when
right,
Elon Musk started talking about electric vehicles, he said that no one will buy an electric vehicle unless it is better, cheaper, and sexier than any gasoline car.
right,
Which made sense to me because change is difficult, and you have to make change tempting and sustainable for it to happen. So okay, I love it. I love my panel today. It's the perfect combination. Okay, so tell me, what do you want me to know, chat to know about climate change right off the bat? Supposing we have no idea about it, how would you introduce this topic? Why are we talking about climate change? Yeah.
okay. Uh, so just basic. I have few slides that give us basic ideas about
Okay.
climate change, simple physical phenomena that help us understand why it is happening, right?
Yeah.
So this just I just like this picture. So this is
Okay.
a really this is from last year. Economist magazine had this cover. It's just their mean temperature across the years, just like world getting warmer. It's just a cool picture. That's why I
Yeah.
wanted
Can
to.
you explain it? What am I looking at here?
Oh, these are just the years,
Yeah.
and the colors are basically how hotter it is getting, how warmer it is getting.
So the average temperature of the year or the hottest temperature of each year.
No, not the hottest. It's the mean
The mean.
average
Okay.
temperature.
Right. Right.
So
Right. Right.
that's I'll show. I have a graph
Sure.
in the next slide. This is
Sure.
just a cool picture that I like.
Yeah, this is desktop wallpaper worthy.
Exactly,
It looks
and
like that.
not only desktop wallpaper. This guy Ed Hawkins, if you see his Twitter display pic, he
Okay.
has made a mask out of this,
Oh
like a
wow.
face mask.
Very
I,
cool. Very cool.
yeah.
Okay. All right.
So this I'm sure many of us have at some point of time during school, high school, has heard this phrase greenhouse effect.
Right.
uh, Basically all the energy we on earth get
Hang on,
is through
Viraj.
sun.
Can you zoom in on the PowerPoint a little bit so that it's a lit. It's more. It takes up more screen
uh,
space, or no? If
is
no, no,
it
no, no. That's too much. That's too much. Okay, go back to the way it was. It's fine.
okay?
Yeah, cool, cool.
No, it's
Continue.
I mean the names are I mean I can just I'll just explain it. It
Sure,
just
sure.
all the energy we on earth get is through the electromagnetic waves from the
Right.
sun, right? So
Yes.
if we did not have any atmosphere, if we just calculate the energy, our temperature of the earth will be minus 18 degrees Celsius.
Yeah.
That's the temperature without atmosphere.
Right.
But since we have this cover layer of atmosphere, what happens is when the waves come hit the earth and go back, they get scattered because of atmosphere.
Right.
This layer, there are a bunch of gas particles, CO2, O2, N2, just bunch of gaseous particles and other particles that scatter these waves, that reflect these waves back to earth.
Right.
And that's why it is warmer. That's why we
Got it.
That's why Earth sustains life.
So
The greenhouse, yeah.
yeah, so the moon, Mars, they don't have atmosphere. At least they don't have the atmosphere that we do, and so it is much colder there.
Right. I
Right.
mean, some planets do have some type of layer of atmosphere
Right.
or gaseous around it, but they have, I mean, their own calculations.
Got it. And yeah, of course. And we have evolved to live in this temperature range. And
Right.
if that temperature range gets screwed up, then everything gets screwed up.
Right.
Okay, continue.
I mean, yeah. So there were much hotter temperatures back many years ago when there were no humans. So
Right.
obviously, Earth has gone. The temperature variation has been there throughout the life of Earth.
Right.
But what we know is what we have. I mean, our human existence has been in a decently warm zone.
Right. In this temperature zone. Right.
Yeah. So that's basically what, I mean, greenhouse effect is basically what sustains life on Earth.
Understood.
But you can imagine if this layer of atmosphere starts reflecting or starts containing more waves, it will get more warmer. As simple as that.
Yeah.
Like, if it starts trapping more heat, it's gonna get warmer. Now, this greenhouse effect is caused by these greenhouse gases, which basically reflect the rays back to the Earth.
Right.
And one of the major gas is CO2.
CO2.
And that's because of the CO2 concentration is increasing. We see that more heat is being trapped inside atmosphere. We are getting warmer. It's
That is
fairly
the basic concept. Right.
Yeah. Obviously, there was, I mean, why people couldn't agree before was because how do you establish causation, right? You know that, okay, atmosphere is huge, CO2 is released, I mean, on a scale really, along with all other gases, CO2 proportion is much lesser, right? So how do you know? So that's why the confusion.
Right. So the idea was nobody was arguing that this was happening, that CO2 was causing this, but the causation, that are we to blame for this? Was that the problem? Okay.
Yes.
No. So
Yeah.
there has been a fundamental understanding of like the science behind climate change and who is causing climate change and what is causing climate change. Really, since I think Svante Arrhenius was one of the first people to kind of establish it, but also like it's been pretty mainstream science concept since the 1970s.
Right.
There's not been that much disagreement in the scientific community about climate change for decades. I mean, truly, it's a pretty well established and well understood concept.
Right.
So
both the concept of both that carbon dioxide was causing climate change and that human action was contributing to carbon dioxide.
Exactly.
Right. Okay. Cool.
But again, there's like how much human action was contributing and how much should that be controlled or reverted.
Yeah.
Or just how much human actions should change has been a part of debate. Yeah.
Right. Because I'm sure, because if it was very, very clear cut, there has to be some counter argument for it to be a controversial topic at all. So, yeah. Yeah, Alex, what are you going to say?
I think part of the counter argument has truly been that there has been disinformation put out into the public intentionally.
Right.
So the scientific community has had a consensus on climate change for a very long time. And even the oil industry, the oil and gas industry, has been planning for climate change. They have equipment that is built for warmer climates now up in the Arctic drilling. And so these industries have known for a very long time about what climate change is and the fact that humans are causing climate change, but have intentionally sowed disinformation and lack of belief in the science in order to continue to make a product that they know is endangering the environment and it is endangering our climate.
Right.
And it is a very, I mean, we'll get to this soon. I know Viraj has some slides on the IPCC, but it is definitely a problem that has a timer. We have to act soon, and the sooner we act, the sooner we act, essentially, like the less the problem will be, but the longer we wait, the more trouble we're going to
it's going to be an exponential. So let's get to that. Let's establish the baseline context, and then let's get to what can we do. So Blaze has already asked, so what can we as a generation do to counter climate change? And I think that's a very important question. We will get to that. Let's establish the fundamental premise of the discussion first. And I have to say this, Viraj, Neha's pointing out that it's ironical that you called the climate change picture as very cool. So yeah, that's all right. Continue.
Yeah, so there are again these. So these graphs that I'm showing is from an organization, a report by organization called Intergovernmental Panel on Climate Change.
Right.
And that is an organization that we see in and read about in the news a lot, right? That is an intergovernmental body situated within United Nations. And again, that the track, the reports they do are done by scientists around the world. It is not original research, but they review published literature around the world.
Right.
And then they come up with something called summary for policymakers. Now, this report is not purely technical in the sense that there is a separate technical summary, but this summary for policymakers report is usually ratified by all the countries,
Right.
line by line. So there is a bit of a political angle to that. Like some countries there are countries that will object on how strongly a point is argued, because that might have some implications for their internal politics or policies.
Right.
So that is the what debate revolves around. So these charts,
on the one hand, there is information,
right,
and there will be debate about information, and on the other hand, there will be debate upon how that information should be conveyed. So the language of the information.
yes.
And from what you're telling me, it's almost as if there isn't much doubt about the information, but there is a lot of argument about how to say this, how to convey this to the public.
Right.
It's
Wow.
very political. It's a
Right.
very political decisions, the summary for policymakers.
Right. And we will have access only to the language that is presented to us.
Right. No, we have the entire report, and we also have the technical summary. But this is what they, as a United Nations General Assembly, agrees with.
Okay.
Agrees to. This is the language. For example, India cannot go in the General Assembly and criticize coal strongly, because that's what we have and that's what we need. I mean, in a soft language, yeah, of course, we'll talk about that we will slowly transition away from coal, but then the language we will always support is that, hey, a lot of jobs depend on it, a lot of poverty and like economic growth depends on it. So the transition will be cognizant of all these things. That's how the language will be modified to sort of, this is not the exact language, but I'm just giving you a flavor of like how it will be
Understood.
agreed upon.
Obviously, because as somebody who is running a country, they have to think about both of those things, and the immediate danger of putting a lot of people out of a job versus the long-term effect of climate change. That is exactly the point of today's discussion, that the present versus the future. And this present versus future, the theme, I think, is going to carry forward in every aspect of climate change discussion. That the present logic says one thing, but the future logic says something else.
Yes. Although that is slowly changing, I think that more and more people are starting to feel that climate change has an impact on their present lives. And people are seeing, like here, for example, I'm in Los Angeles. Just a couple of weeks ago, we had horrible fires in Northern California that turned the sky red. You could literally wake up and the sky was red right outside your window. People couldn't go outside. The air quality was so bad in parts of Oregon because of the fires that health experts actually don't know how it affects the body. The scale here tops out at 500 for the AQI. The AQI in parts of Oregon was over 700. So people are really seeing the impacts of climate change right in front of their
Here
eyes.
and
So I
now.
think that
Yeah.
future presence orientation is starting to shift a little bit.
Yeah. So it's almost like we are in that future now. We have reached there. That hypothetical future that we were talking about where climate change will affect us is now. We are there already.
It's becoming real, and I think people are starting to feel more and more that we live in a world that has already been fingerprinted by climate change. We can feel it.
Right.
And in our bodies more than before. It was this, for many people, I think, an abstract hypothetical future.
Yes, that may or may not happen, and people always talk about do this for your grandchildren, and very few people can think about their grandchildren when they are looking for a job or when they are hunting for what to do next. But if it affects you now, then it becomes a lot more real.
And it is affecting people now. And right now we have warms. I think the IPCC 1.5 degree report said that we're at about 1 degree of warming currently. You know, we are on a very bad track. We're projected to hit way more than 1 degree. And even if we meet the most ambitious goals of decarbonization and decarbonize fully by 2050, and then start to suck more carbon out of the atmosphere, we're still going to warm 1.5 degrees.
Yeah.
The goals of the Paris Agreement are for 2 degrees, and that is already considered a very ambitious mitigation plan.
Right. Right.
So things will accelerate from here.
Right. Okay. Viraj, what is? Yeah, we'll take it step by step because this is probably one of the most important conversations that we can have. You know, more than anything else, there will come a time when this is going to be the most important thing, and so let's give it our attention and try and understand it once and for all. Okay, Viraj, what is there in this chart now?
So this is okay. Just let me finish talking about the. So again, IPCC's these charts are from the report called Climate Change, the Physical Science Basis. This are from Summary for Policymakers for that report. And so why I chose this report was, or why I chose Summary for Policymakers was that no matter what else is in the report, this is agreed upon by all the countries.
Yes.
So this is commonly understood. There is no debate or there is no sort of any doubt about it.
So currently in world politics, this is the report that people are going by.
I mean, there have been the latest report will be the one that Alexandria mentioned. That is 1.5 degree report that came out last year.
Okay.
But the AR5 is assessment report 5.
Okay.
So these are commissioned by IPCC assessment reports. They are not every year. So this happened just before Paris Agreement. Assessment report 6 is supposed to come out in 2022.
Okay.
So that will come out with after 2 years.
Okay.
So this again, Alexandria, can you talk about this? I think somebody's at the door. I'll just.
Yeah, go for it. So basically, like one of the dates that people hear a lot is like, have you heard? You know, we have 10 years to stop climate change. Have you heard this places? Yeah. So that comes from these reports, actually, that number. So the 1.5 report basically was saying that in order to the 2 degree, the AR5 was the basis of the Paris Agreement. So that was assessing what's going to happen at 2 degrees of warming. And the 1.5 report came afterwards, and it was trying to say, okay, 2 degrees we know is bad, and we know what we need to do to meet 2 degrees. But what if we say 1.5 degrees? Because there was a lot of, especially like small island nations, developing countries, who are saying we're going to feel the impacts of 2 degrees most. Climate change impacts are not evenly distributed throughout the world. Countries that are in tropical areas, countries that are low-lying at sea level are going to experience.
Like where I am. I mean, Bombay is right. 6 hours of rain and we are swimming on the streets. And we should be really concerned about this. Okay.
Exactly. So the risk is not evenly distributed. So then the countries from the UN came back together and said, we don't feel that 2 degrees is just, because there are going to be so many disproportionate impacts on small island states, low-income countries,
Right.
that let's assess what might happen at 1.5, and if meeting 1.5 is a possible target. And they found that there is a significant difference between the impacts at 1.5 degrees and 2 degrees. And they came up with a plan for how decarbonization can happen to meet 1.5. And what they said was that in order to meet 1.5 degrees, we have to decarbonize by 50% by 2030, so 10 years from now,
Right.
and 100% by 2050.
Okay. So in
so
30
those are where
years, just to put it in a different way, in 30 years, we have to decarbonize 100%.
100%.
What does that
and
mean?
then start to suck carbon out of the atmosphere.
What does that mean, decarbonize 100%? What does that mean?
Net zero carbon emissions. So no carbon emissions, net zero carbon emissions from the human economy. So
Okay.
we need to completely
So
go to zero.
no
By 2050.
burning coal, no petrol,
No coal.
no gasoline cars, basically no use of fossil fuels at all.
No fossil. That is the massive challenge that we face and that we have
Correct.
to meet.
So again, there are as Alexandria said, it's net zero. So there are things like you can create additional carbon sink, and then that can absorb some CO2, and that lets you emit some CO2 basically. So if you have
Okay.
enough carbon sinks, so like forestation or tree covers, so all those things also work. Or
What was the term you used? Carbon sink.
carbon sink. So that's where
that's like,
carbon is
Oh, okay. So,
getting back to,
so trees. I mean, basically just plant trees.
yes.
Okay.
But the scale of that is very small for context in comparison to the amount that
We are
humans
putting
emit
out.
every year.
Right.
Yes.
Correct.
Just out of curiosity, since we're talking about this, were they working on some new material that can absorb carbon and convert it back into the solid form? I saw some documentary on something.
People talk about these kinds of technologies of carbon capture and storage.
Yes.
But right now, like, the best way that we have of carbon capture and storage is really like afforestation. There is not, like, people talk about these technologies, but right now there is no scalable technology. There are these things in development, but at the moment it's kind of a unicorn technology. It hasn't been developed yet.
Right. So it's cheaper and more efficient to plant trees. That is the best technology we have. Okay.
Or it's cheaper and more efficient as well, just to decarbonize. I mean, at this point, to suck out one ton of CO2 from the atmosphere is extremely expensive. It's just super expensive it's way more expensive to put CO2 in the atmosphere and try and suck it out later than it is to just not put it there in the first place.
Right. Okay, understood. So the first on the top left, what we are looking at is the what is going up? What is it that we are seeing going up? The temperature.
Temperature.
Right.
Annual average temperature, basically.
Okay. All right. Okay. So
I
we're
mean,
starting
it is
from
like
1850 on the left to 2000. So that is how it's gone up in the last 150 years. Okay.
Yes, correct.
Got it.
And it's relative to the average of 1961 to 1990. So that is the zero level. And you can see, I mean, that's just the way they decided to represent it. But
Fine.
this is decadal average, average over 10 years.
Right.
And again, the basic point is that it is increasing. The long-term trend is increasing. And that's like the dissonance between the way we think that, hey, this year was colder. Where is global warming?
Yeah.
But that's not the case. That is weather. The weather and climate being two different things.
Yes.
Climate is more long-term.
Yes. I remember in the US, some senator had brought a ball of snow into the Senate, and I mean, that was a real thing.
We'll talk about that later.
Sure.
We'll talk about that later. But
that's the whole thing.
I thought it was a spoof. I thought it was like a joke, but no, it was a real thing. All right, cool.
Yeah.
Makes
So
sense.
these plots are basically just, I put it there to show the long-term trends of just world heating up.
Got it.
This is just sea ice going down. This is also northern hemisphere spring snow cover sort of having a slight decreasing trend.
Reduce.
Yeah. Then the sea is average upper ocean heat content. So that is
Hang on.
going up.
Hang on.
The ocean.
One
Yeah.
sec. Alex,
I'm trying to come back on. I don't know why.
sure. Do one thing. Can you connect like a headphone or something? If you have one?
A headphone?
Yes.
Can you not hear me?
No, I can hear you, but I think there's some sort of cross connection that happens. If you have one, otherwise it's fine.
I
Otherwise you're
actually don't have any.
cool.
Sorry.
Sit.
Okay.
Don't go out to buy one now. It's fine. Okay, continue, Viraj.
Yeah. So again, sea is just basically showing that the ocean is heating up, and that again, ocean temperature also causes the ice to melt.
Right.
So that's where it's connected.
Right.
Also, the final is that global average sea level change. That is also although it is like millimeters,
Yeah.
but it's still
Sure.
increasing.
Yeah.
And I mean, I just put them there to show the long term.
You know what's crazy? We knew this stuff when I was in school.
Yeah.
It's a little it's mind-boggling that we knew this stuff.
Yes.
It's been what?
And that's
20 years?
it's
25 years?
longer.
Yeah.
Longer. And it's truly baffling the inaction. Like the inaction is
Yeah.
what blows my mind, because we've had similar collective action problems like this before. I mean, the ozone layer
Yeah.
was one. There was a big problem because we were having a hole in the ozone layer because there
Right.
was a chemical called chlorofluorocarbon
Yes.
that was being emitted and creating a hole in the ozone layer. But internationally, as a community, we came together and put on international regulations on chlorofluorocarbons. And now the hole in the ozone layer is slowly being
It's fixed, yeah. Okay.
there are
So we can
there
do
are
it if we want.
occasionally- We can do it if we want to. There are occasionally like small blips because some people suspect like that there are illegal emissions of chlorofluorocarbons, but in general, that problem improves substantially, and we have the capacity to do that. But the problem is that our entire economy is based on fossil fuels. Our entire economic system rests on carbon emissions at this point in time, and there is so much money tied up in the fossil fuel industry. So there is this big political push against action.
Yeah.
And it truly boggles the mind. That is the scale of the problem really is about creating action and creating an impetus.
This is super crazy because this is not a complex topic. It's very simple.
Yeah.
More carbon,
Yeah.
more carbon dioxide, more greenhouse gases, more temperature, water rising, we are all screwed. The only reason we are not doing it is because our entire economic system is based on fossil fuels, and it is in the fossil fuel industry's interest to not switch because the industry will shut.
Yeah, there's profit. There's money in denying the problem.
Right.
And there is money in putting your future, your personal future, your children's future at risk in order to not acknowledge.
Okay. Again, it is so crazy that we talked about this when I was in school. I swear we had discussions on this, and we talked about the ozone layer, we talked about carbon dioxide, we talked about greenhouse gases, and we talked about emissions, and that is why all those things came about, right? Like the cars getting checked for how much. So there was a time when all the trucks and the buses would emit like these black smoke, and then at one time they made a change in the law, and then okay, you have to, I don't know, just clean and what was that?
But that again, what we briefly discussed offline was that again is a problem of air pollution, which is more visible, which is a local problem. So it is more solvable.
Right.
So again, I'm gonna be like the way it is turning out to be. I am gonna be an advocate of complexity, and I'm gonna be the devil's advocate, and
Okay.
just like bring back like and say that Yeah, I mean, it is known, but we are really badly locked in into the current economy.
Yeah.
So even though oil industry might be profiting, if that we suddenly decide to switch, there will be people unemployed.
Yes.
And country like India or developing countries cannot really
Yeah.
do not really have option.
Yeah.
They are their infrastructure of reskilling or giving new jobs or just like retraining
Yeah.
aren't that strong or
Right.
aren't strong at all.
Right.
So there is obviously the human face to it, and obviously, and I'll give it. I mean, Alexandra is also right to the point that these oil companies who have the knowledge, who have the power to do something, should do something,
Hmm.
but they aren't.
Yeah.
And we'll get to the I mean,
We'll
when we
get to
talk about
this.
communication,
Yes.
why awareness is important, we'll
Yes.
get to
And
we'll
we'll
get
bring
to
in a
that
little bit of
eventually.
neuroscience because I'm itching to talk about
Yes.
that.
But
Yes.
I do want to say just that like labor is a really important question here too, because it's not just the oil executives. There's also lots of people, as we've been talking about, that rely on jobs from
Yeah.
this industry. And so one of the key governance challenges is that of a just transition. So how do we transition from a fossil-based economy to a clean economy while ensuring that people aren't going to go hungry, that they're still going to have a job, and how do we transition those fossil jobs into jobs around the solar economy or wind in wind industry
Natural.
or anything
Yeah.
like that.
So it's really cool that you guys are both here because now I'm really understanding the importance of sustainability, which is this, that you can't just keep saying that okay, we need to be careful, we need to protect the environment. We need to have answers which are sustainable. Human lives should not suffer because of our actions, and we have to find a way to communicate this to the public because there will be people who are giving the wrong information. So,
Exactly.
all right, so you two can
It's
save
a
the world if you come together. Lovely.
it's a
Amazing.
straightforward problem, but solution is really
Right. Can I just
complicated.
ask? You mentioned solar and battery and all. Just random question. Switching to solar will also involve a lot of lithium-ion batteries and all of that. Is there something to be concerned about on lithium mining? It's just a random question, I know, but it's
So
just yeah.
yeah, I can take that. So there are couple of things, right? So that's one more thing that you have been stressing on sustainability, right?
Yeah.
So whatever we do, it has to be sustainable.
Correct.
So for example, when back in the days when Western countries or just like big oil companies used to find oil or gas in any country, in any poor country, that country would change. Like that country, like it, we call it resource curse. So you find the resource in it, it gets exploited. We have
Right.
multiple
Of
examples.
course.
Nigeria, I mean, many
Congo.
African countries.
Yeah.
Exactly.
Yeah.
So now, similarly, our batteries, we use cobalt in our batteries,
Right.
and Congo has a lot of cobalt. And now, for this renewable energy technology, Congo is getting exploited,
Right.
and that has been my personal sort of obsession. That if we are working on newer technology, we should do it better this time. We should do it more sustainable this time. And it is not that nothing is being done, but it was pretty bad in the beginning. Like the children were handpicking ore at $1.50 per day.
Right.
I mean, there was an Amnesty International report called "This Is What We Die For." It's a
Right.
pretty appealing report. If anybody watching this wants
Damn.
to see what's happening, it's a pretty really moving report on what's happening, on what we drive right now, EV and all the fancy tech. But
Yeah.
then, like, there are things
Like, what's the
happening. A lot of
price of this? What is?
exactly.
It's like you cannot escape human. The pitfalls of human behavior. You can't escape it. It is what, whether we are talking about what got us into climate change, or if we start talking about sustainable energy, um, yeah, we cannot escape the pitfalls of human behavior.
But things are improving nowadays. A lot of battery manufacturers are moving away from cobalt,
Right.
so that's definitely a good thing.
So my question was okay. My question was actually about lithium ion specifically, and is converting everything into batteries a problem in the long run? Is it sustainable? That
So
yeah.
so there is no single solution. So
Right.
again, your problem is not a car. Your problem is mobility.
Hmm.
Your problems to solve is not that I want to own a car. I want to be mobile. It's
Hmm.
like I need a hole, not a drill. The purpose is moving. The purpose is not owning a car. So
I like that.
forget electric vehicle. Even
Yeah.
if India, do you think all the Indian middle class or people who are now moving into middle class being able to afford cars, if everybody buys a car,
Hmm.
there will not be space to
Yeah.
move around in
It's not
India. In India.
sustainable.
Exactly.
Right.
So the solution to transportation is not just electric vehicles. They are
Yeah.
electric vehicles. They are good public transit.
Yeah.
They are cheaper, more affordable, equitable, really distributed urban planning,
And
because it starts with there.
work from home. My
That too.
God, I have realized I mean, it comes with its own problems, but this pandemic has just opened up this whole world of how much movement has been uh, pointless.
Exactly.
We've been
Exactly.
moving all over the place for no particular reason. We could have got everything done by just staying at home.
Exactly.
So yeah, probably going forward, that is a huge thing to look at. Make
Yes.
everything work. Make movement a luxury.
Yes.
You go out for to travel to have fun, but yeah. Okay, continue.
But that's
Yeah.
why I
So
think it's important to think about climate change as an opportunity as well as a problem.
Right.
Climate change gives us an opportunity to rethink the way that we do so many basic things in our society, urban planning, transport, and it's a chance for us to implement solutions that will not only help us solve climate change, but also other social problems.
Yeah.
Um,
I
so,
love that.
I mean, Viraj can talk about that in particular more. He has lots of knowledge about like transportation in particular, but like I think it's important not to talk about it only as this scary, huge
Right.
challenge, which it is. It certainly is, but you can also view it in an optimistic way that this is a chance for us to really reshape the way that we do things.
Our world view. And so for instance, Alex, Viraj, the three of us wouldn't be here talking about this and having this conversation if it weren't for the pandemic. And the pandemic is one of the worst things that had happened to us in recent times. But here we are because the pandemic gave me time to start neurology clinics, and that led me to start the YouTube live streams, and that led me to get interested in all these things. And now here we are talking about it, and probably this will have a beneficial effect. 130 people are watching, and all of them will learn something about climate change today. And I love what you said, Alex, that it doesn't have to be a scary, horrible thing. It could be just motivation for us to innovate and make a better life.
Mm-hmm. And I think that the pandemic and climate change have a lot in common,
yes.
because they're both collective action problems. They were both caused in part by failure of governance.
Yeah.
There's been in both cases a
Wow.
systematic denial of the science. So
Yes.
people are saying that this is not happening, it's not real, masks don't work. And in particular, that denial of the science is motivated by a desire to get people out back working, to get people out back at their jobs, putting themselves at risk
Right.
in order to turn profits. And then lastly, the risks are not equitably distributed.
Right.
People I know most about America because that's where I'm from, but here, people who are low income, people who are Black or Latino are most at risk from COVID because they're the ones who are forced to go out and go to their jobs.
Right.
And
And that applies to climate change as well.
And that also applies to climate change.
Yeah.
That is exactly the case where you see the most vulnerable communities, the most marginalized communities, the lowest income communities, countries globally, but also within a developed country or a wealthy country. This is also true, where people who are already vulnerable, already marginalized, are getting hit hardest first.
Which is crazy because that it's almost as if no matter what the problem, the same people are going to suffer, and the same group of people are denying it.
Yeah.
Sort of.
Exactly.
So
No,
in
totally.
yeah, the way I put it, exactly what Alexandria said, the one word I would use is both are exogenous shocks. Both
Hmm.
are shocks from outside
Right.
that we didn't account for, we didn't plan for as a
Hmm.
civilization, as a society.
Yeah.
And what they both are doing is exposing our weaknesses,
Right.
exposing our system fault lines. And
Yes.
that's why, in a way, personally, for me, what happened after pandemic honestly wasn't surprising, because I have been studying these fault lines from climate change perspective anyway.
Yeah.
So I'm like, yeah, that's what happens when you, I mean, that's how the system is
Yeah.
gamed against the
Hmm.
vulnerable. And just to say, just to add the vulnerability, while we are at vulnerability, there was a report, I think couple of years ago or a year ago, by Asian Development Bank. They did some climate modeling, and they looked at few developmental economic development parameters, and they figured out which are the most vulnerable hotspots around the world.
Right.
I think top 5 had two or three in India. One of them I remember because it was Vidarbha, because it is pretty bad, and you know how it is, like being
Yeah.
from Maharashtra.
Yeah.
So Vidarbha
Wow.
is
I,
one of the, yeah, go ahead.
oh, no, no, go ahead, finish.
Yeah, so and then again,
I wonder if
it's
people
not,
from Vidarbha know this.
no, probably not. And also,
Wow.
but then there is another thing, that it wouldn't be so bad if Vidarbha had a good irrigation system.
Right.
So it's not like Vidarbha's solution is not fixing climate change.
Right.
And I'll get to it after a couple of, after the next slide, I'll get to
Sure.
the actions,
Right.
and
Right.
I'll talk about it.
Okay. Okay.
Uh,
Got it.
but
Yeah.
Alex, you
But
were saying something. Yeah.
yeah, I just was gonna say that, like, another thing too is these crises, not only do they have a lot in common, but they amplify each other. So I was working this summer as a reporter for an outlet called Grist, and part of what I was reporting on was the intersections of coronavirus and climate change. And there are multiple intersections where, again, like the hardest hit people are getting hit first. So here in California, for example, you had farm workers who had to be out in the fields picking produce without protection, proper protection from the coronavirus. So people were getting really sick. And then on top of that, you had the smoke from the fires in California, and they didn't have the proper protection from the smoke or the heat, in addition to the coronavirus. So all of these crises are compounding on each other, like Viraj said, exposing the fault lines that are already there.
It's sort of like so in India, the healthcare system in the government hospitals is it's pretty tight. So the resident doctors are under a lot of stress because a lot of patients, small spaces, overcrowding, infections, and not the most patient friendly atmosphere, and not the most doctor friendly atmosphere, because obviously everybody is frustrated, everybody is stressed, and irrespective of what the calamity, the doctors suffer. So whether it's a pandemic, everybody crowds into the hospital, the doctors suffer. Whether it's torrential rains, doctors suffer. If there's a malaria outbreak, the doctors suffer. Because suddenly everything will come on to that. It is a single point of weakness. And all the pressure will come on to that. And it's what you are saying sounds a lot like, I mean, I'm connecting to that because that is what I went through during residency. But it does sound like that every system will have two or three vulnerable spots that will bear the brunt of any damage, any harm that the system will face. And we need to make those are the people who should be most concerned about. And maybe they don't know enough, or they are worried about other things like their job or the next paycheck to be really concerned about this. But this is something that definitely should be talked about more. Yeah.
yes,
Okay.
I'll quickly finish what we were,
Yes, please.
the basics, and we can move to the actions and neuroscience of it.
Yeah.
It's just one slide that's left. But yeah, so as we said, as we were talking about, this is also a graph on the same report, but I'm going to show another version of it, which is by Environmental Protection Agency in US. It's the same, their source is the same report. It's just they have, it's a more readable format. So again, these are the long-lived greenhouse gases. As I said, there are greenhouse gases which sort of trap the heat.
Right.
And what we call radiative forcing is basically how they, like, whether they trap the heat or whether they, so some of them like ozone or some aerosols will reflect the heat waves
Mm.
coming
Mm.
in the beginning,
Mm.
entering the atmosphere, they'll reflect that. So
Mm.
some of them do reflect back the waves, but those who trap the heat are basically the carbon dioxide, methane have the most radiative forcing.
Right. So
And you
you,
can,
speaking of
yeah,
methane, somebody had asked about the role of animal farming.
Mhm.
yes.
Can you just
So
address that as well?
so
Yeah,
methane
I
is a
can talk.
pretty bad. Yeah, go ahead. Yeah, take it.
Oh, I can talk a little bit about it. I mean, part of it is like methane. So you've probably heard about like cows emitting a lot of methane in particular.
Yeah.
And methane is interesting because it has more warming potential than carbon dioxide. It actually causes more warming per like
Okay.
units, I
Yes.
guess you
Sure.
can imagine.
Sure.
But it also doesn't last as long in the atmosphere. It's a short-lived
Oh.
gas.
Okay.
So that's a slightly different from CO2. So it's important, but CO2 is definitely a bigger concern. A big concern with animal farming, though, is even if you eliminate all of the CO2 from the processing of beef or farming of animals or whatever, there's a huge land use concern. So the problem is that a lot of pasture land competes with forested land that currently absorb CO2. So you can see this in the Amazon. Part of the reason why last year there were such big fires in the Amazon, everyone was that last year or 2 years ago? I can't even remember.
Yeah.
Anyway,
Our concept of time is really screwed up now.
Yeah.
No, I
but
won't be
basically,
surprised if there is fire this year also. So
yeah, probably it'll come again. But
Oh,
basically,
no.
like, it's not normal for the Amazon to burn
Right.
like it was burning 2 years ago. But part of it was that Jair Bolsonaro was trying to say, look, like, the Amazon is open for development, and he was encouraging his supporters, who are in particular people who do cattle ranching, to set these fires.
Right.
Which then, it was a particularly dry year, so they burned out of control.
Yeah.
But to set fires to burn the land to clear for pasture. So that's a big part of it, is that there is this competition between land uses.
Right.
And if you have pasture land, it's often taking away from forested land that would otherwise be conserving or absorbing carbon.
Got it. Got
So
it.
emissions from land use is a big concern with
So,
farming.
When we talk about, so somebody has specifically asked about non-vegetarian food, which again comes down to all of this. So the two main concerns are one, cattle releasing methane, but which is less of a concern than carbon dioxide because methane will not last as long.
Mm-hmm.
And two is pasture land competing with forest land.
Yes. And so, I mean, I would say, like, with food decisions, it's like you have to make it kind of instinctively. Like, beef is a really big emitter. So that's definitely,
Okay. Yeah.
probably like to be cut out of your diet as much as possible if you're trying to think about individual actions. That's like a big one. But like, you have the same concerns if you're eating a vegetable or a fruit that's imported from really far away. I mean, you need
Sure.
to think about those kinds of things
Yeah.
as well. So there's all these different considerations when it comes to people's
Yeah.
diets, and those are very personal and cultural considerations.
Yeah, it's I mean, if you look at the global picture and the amount of variables that go into a decision, it can get a little overwhelming. For
It is.
Have you seen the series called The Good Place?
Like, cheaty. Everyone has to be cheaty and agonye. But that's the problem, is that why is it up to the individual to make these decisions?
Yeah.
To bear the responsibility for
That's-
what is a collective problem. Like, individual decisions are not nothing, but they only go so far. And climate change is truly a collective problem.
Yeah, exactly.
right.
I mean,
Also,
if
just-
individuals were to be trusted, there wouldn't be any need for the law and the courts, and because there are certain fundamental principles that we do ascribe to society, and we don't leave to individuals to take the call. And climate change is as important as any of the other decisions.
And an oil company would love for the burden of climate change to fall on the individual. BP released a personal carbon footprint tracker. Why would BP release something like that? And the
Right.
reason is that psychologically, it's beneficial for a company like BP to make a consumer think that it's their responsibility to manage and govern their own carbon emissions.
Yeah.
Because
Yeah.
then you become responsible for the emissions,
Correct.
not whoever is producing the product that you're
Oh,
using.
wow.
And again, like Viraj said, you need a hole, not a drill. People aren't interested in in a car, they're interested in transport, but BP is trying to say, okay, well, you need to keep using our product, but like here's the way that you can govern like what your emissions are, essentially.
Right.
It gets very twisted up.
Because it's very interesting, because you have a problem which is climate change, and everyone will think about that problem. But if you attach the solution to that problem as something very local and something for you to do, then you will stop thinking about that problem. Because I'm worried about climate change, so I'll switch off the fan, or when I leave the room, and I will think that, okay, I have done my bit for climate change, and now let's see what happens. Whereas the real decisions that have to be made aren't being made, and every individual person is thinking, okay, I have done my bit, so there is not enough public backlash now to make the real change happen.
Exactly. It's this individualization of risk, and
Oh, man.
I'm not saying
It's basically
Yeah.
it's basically transferring the guilt to individuals.
Right.
Exactly.
I mean,
Yeah.
there is a place for individual action as well.
Sure.
You should switch off the fan,
I mean,
but
yeah.
then you
I'm not
should
saying
then switch
don't.
off the fan and then go out on the streets and protest for a better, responsible company. I'm just
Yeah.
I'm just
Understood.
saying, yeah.
Understood.
Also,
has to
just
be
like
both.
about the methane, I know it has a shorter lifetime, but it is still years. It's not like it goes and gets emitted and just vanishes.
Okay.
So it's still in years, but it is much shorter than carbon dioxide.
Okay. So it is
But
still a
then
factor.
And
It is still a
those years
factor.
mean life also. Yeah, I mean, years is not a small
Correct.
lifetime.
Yeah.
You
I mean,
call-
if you're saying 30 years may decarbonization, then years is a big deal.
exactly.
It
Right.
is, yes.
Right.
And also methane is also is also part of debate, because a lot of methane is trapped under the ice near the poles. So when we talk about oceanic temperature increase,
Right.
we are scared of that methane. So I mean, methane being released constantly,
Right.
being released forever,
Right,
which is
right.
trapped in the ground right now.
Correct.
So once you open that tap, then methane is just out
Like,
in the
yeah, the
and
cat is out of the bag.
Exactly.
Okay.
And
Okay.
even though
I
you
don't want
may
to
be
say
able
that
to,
methane is unimportant.
Yeah,
It's
understood.
definitely not unimportant.
Yeah.
yeah.
Okay. Cool.
So this picture again, you can see the bottom line is what all the countries basically agree on.
Right.
All the statistical modeling and everything will show that this is the net total of human activities. That is the radiative forcing. That is basically warming effect.
Right.
It's just a fancy name for a technical name for a warming effect. How much
Got
of a warming effect these have.
Right.
So that's your anthropogenic climate change, and
Yeah. Human,
that's
due to human, our fault.
yeah. Now we come to climate action. Just quickly, there are basically two things. One is mitigation and adaptation. Mitigation is basically you mitigate your emissions, you decrease them, you
Okay.
switch to cleaner options, you switch to cleaner economy, and then you decrease your emissions. Right. So that is mitigate. Adaptation is
This is what we can do. Like, this is the take-home message. Ki,
yeah.
What
I mean,
can yeah.
all actions. What I'm saying, whatever actions we do for climate change
Will fall under.
can be can be classified mitigation and adaptation.
Got it.
So mitigation is basically reducing the carbon emission, and adaptation is, the emissions have already been released. There is way crazier CO2 in the atmosphere, and people are already saying that 2018 is the year we start living climate change.
Wow.
So it's already there. Heat temperature has warmed up. There are crazy extreme weather events like storms and crazy events happening.
Yeah.
So how do we adapt to that?
They're running out of names for storms.
Exactly.
I saw a meme that said that they're going to be calling Elon Musk soon to find out what to name the next hurricane.
No, there was another meme that said, or a tweet that said, you should name storms by big oil companies.
Oh, wow. Yeah, yeah. Makes
That would
sense.
be a good
Yeah.
Hurricane
psychological.
Exxon.
Makes
But yeah,
sense.
and then the third thing is synergies with SDGs, and that's where we said what Alexandria was saying, opportunities. SDGs are sustainable development goals that are set out by United Nations. So
Yes.
a bunch of healthcare, poverty reduction, and just like bunch of goals.
Yes.
And what we also call co-benefits. So my personal example would be, if I'm looking at EV policy,
Hmm.
I promote not only like greenhouse gas emissions decrease, but I also promote air pollution reduction. Then I also see if there are any employment benefits,
Right.
and like elevating people in already in poverty. So there are these co-benefits.
So,
Like for
yeah, yeah.
yeah, for country like India, you talk about solar or EV. Now we know that we haven't had great industrial sector. So now even like our prime minister is claiming or pushing for this, that now it is an opportunity for us to directly get into these newer technologies so that we also cut down emissions, we also create
Yes.
job, we also boost the economy.
Right. We don't have to
Now
go
that
through the same mistakes that other countries did. We could directly switch to the next. Yeah, understood.
exactly.
Very
So
cool.
that is what I meant by synergies. And in a way, synergies is like not just between two climate or environment goals, but just like development goals also.
Okay.
So you talk about Vidarbha farmers and Vidarbha. Now they will be able to cope with heat better if they had good irrigation system. There is just no good irrigation system.
Right, right.
Now there is no good irrigation system because electricity
Yeah.
is expensive, or those that is there is a problem. So now government introduced solar pumps. So you see how like there are multiple solutions trying to attack multiple problems.
Yeah.
So it's like a systems sort of a way where you have 2-3 problems, you introduce 2-3 interventions, and you sort of collectively address them.
So
That's pretty much everything looks like that in climate change.
this is such a wonderful example of cross-platform thinking, which is the way the world has been going is towards super specialization, that everybody will have a very narrow microscopic view of one subject in which they will study for the next 20, 30 years, and that is what they know and that is all they will look at. And at least in medicine it is getting that way, that somebody is doing medicine and then neurology, and then inside neurology epilepsy, and then inside epilepsy surgery of epilepsy, and then that's it, and
Right.
you it's while it is great because you do get to learn a lot about that one thing, you kind of miss the big picture.
Yeah.
And yeah, so the way you're talking about this makes me think that this is a big picture problem for sure. You cannot have just one view on this. You need,
And
yeah,
I think that's why interdisciplinary work
right,
with respect to climate change is so important, and
right,
people who have like expertise in multiple areas, because it is truly a problem that necessitates
right.
solutions from every discipline, every area of knowledge. And
Got
yeah,
it.
I mean,
It's amazing, and we haven't even started talking about how important neuroscience is for this
yes. So we can get
and
to
behavior.
that.
So hang on. So Disha, thank you for joining the membership group. Manasa Rao, hi Sid, I'm a sustainability consultant. Seeing you discuss this makes me so happy and sad. Oh man, I get what you mean. Awesome that you're raising awareness. Happy to answer any questions with whatever I know. Thank you so much, Manasa. Yes, please do contribute with whatever we are discussing. Any opinion that you have, we would love it. So hang on, I'm just going to see if everybody is with us so far. Mansa, selling services rather than products is what manufacturers are looking at now. Example HP. So they are making a shift slowly away
Yes.
from, because they're also realizing that this is inevitable, right? All electric, all vehicle manufacturers that have an electric division, and it is
There are
inevitable.
Yeah.
No, you don't look very
No, correct.
optimistic.
No. There is
Yeah.
definitely, but there are. I think we touched upon this earlier when I said, we need a hole, not a drill. We need to really think about these from a design stage,
Hmm.
not just like, oh, this is bad, I'll replace this with this.
Hmm.
No, we need to go back to design stage and then replace, then think about sustainable solutions. So, for example, cars, right? So now in India, we have an opportunity to think from design stage, like promote better public transportation,
Yeah.
because already like people use a lot of public transportation. Do not, not everybody owns a car, and
Right.
if we continue to improve our service in public transit,
Yeah.
that will continue to be. People will not. I mean, how
For
many
sure.
in Mumbai really need a car, or just
Yeah,
like,
yeah. And once the metro comes,
exactly,
even people with cars will prefer to use the metro because at
exactly,
least the plan is super impressive, and
exactly,
it's something that should have happened 10 years ago. But yeah,
right.
we'll take
And
it
then
when we get it. Yeah.
also, but then with US, what happens is we are stuck in a bad design. The
Hmm.
cities are designed in such way, it is extremely difficult to plan public transit in these extremely spread out cities,
Right.
because that public transit is extremely underutilized, because obviously there aren't many people.
Hmm.
They are extremely spread out, and
Hmm.
it is not economical to have really good long public transit systems. So for
Right.
example, in New York or city like Boston or New York or like
You can
San
have
Francisco
subways and
has the,
stuff. Yeah.
yeah, but then something like Houston, Texas, which is
Right.
like everything is spread out,
You
it
need
is
a
really
car.
difficult to make it happen. Yeah.
Yeah.
So we are stuck in bad designs, and partly now Alexandria, I think, will talk more
You
about
don't
this,
just
but
need a car, but you need a pickup truck, from what I've read. I think
exactly.
that
SUV,
is an SUV.
Hummer.
And also this bad design of highways
Right.
passing through cities, and
Mm.
making cities spread out, was at some point of time promoted by car companies, because they
Damn.
wanted to sell more cars. So they lobbied for urban designs which are more spread out, which will have to use a car.
Right.
So that's like,
Like make the problem inevitable.
yeah,
Yeah, so I'm from Minneapolis. That's my hometown,
Right.
and Minneapolis used to have an amazing streetcar system. So really good public transportation. It went through all of the areas around the city, and it was ripped out. It was actively ripped out because car companies wanted to sell cars in Minneapolis. And so they ripped out the existing public transportation, and the streetcars that are now in San Francisco. San Francisco is famous for having streetcars on the hills.
Right.
Those came from Minneapolis after.
Wow. They
airport was
removed
ripped
it
out.
because
Mhm.
damn, when was this? How long ago was this?
I think this was when, I'm not totally sure, but this was definitely when like the highway system was developing in the city. I would
Wow.
have to check,
Wow.
but I think in the early 1900s.
Right. Oh man. So it is part of that systematic, again, like making problems inevitable. Like you ensure policy decisions that will lead to certain outcomes. How can it not? If you take those decisions. So we tend to think that the world around us has to be this way because how else can it be? But that's not true. It could have been very different.
yeah.
Okay.
And countries like India have that opportunity to
Correct.
start from design stage.
Yes.
So
Yeah.
that's
It's the one advantage of being a developing country. So we can
Yeah.
choose how to develop now. Okay. Alex, tell me about what is important. What should I know? What should chat know about communication? Why is this so
Yeah.
important? Yeah.
So, I mean, I think to talk about communication, I want to start with denial, because we've talked a lot about how denial is a really big part of the problem, and it's not only coming from the individual, but it's also coming from.
Oh, hang on. Can you just hold on? There is a very, very famous dog, if you can hear. And the dog at around 10:30 joins in on all my chats, all my live
That's so
streams.
nice.
It's somewhere
Wow.
out. It's somewhere out in my building. But the problem is that my chat gets super distracted by the dog, and they refuse to listen to what we are saying. So I'm just going to shut the window and come one sec.
I wonder what the dog's name is.
I'm fairly confident it's a street dog.
We should name it anyway.
Yeah, fair.
Yeah, who let the dogs out? Bow bow OP. Like, so this happens every time I forget to shut the window, and the dog waits till the conversation gets really interesting, and then it jumps in. Every
Nice.
time.
Do you have a name for it?
No, I don't yet. But I'm sure chat will. Yeah,
Maybe the chat can name it.
we just call him Bow Bow.
Bow Bow's a great name.
Yeah, I know. I agree. Bow Bow OP in the chat. Okay.
He's getting affected from climate change as well.
Yes, I actually.
He's mad about it. He's trying to put in his 2 cents.
Yeah, but he's very open to joining in all sorts of conversations, because last time we were talking about mindfulness and meditation, and he had a lot to say about that as well. So it's
lots of opinions from Bao Bao. Bao Bao's the real expert.
Yes. Okay, tell me. Sorry for interrupting you. Tell me.
Oh no, that's so denial, I think, is a good place to start, because like we've talked about, there is denial that's coming from disinformation campaigns, but also climate change is a relatively hard concept for people to sometimes wrap their minds around for a couple of reasons. And I'm sure that you can pitch in on the neuroscience aspect of this.
Yeah.
So first, for a long time, the way that climate change was communicated was in graphs and numbers and statistics.
Right.
And it's very hard for people to be affected emotionally or feel moved by a number. It's not, people don't find it interesting. People don't latch onto it. Right. Also, climate change for a very long time, the icon of climate change, which I hate with my whole heart, is that of a polar bear on an ice cap. And that makes me so sad, because while I am truly sad and empathetic for the polar bear, most people don't care.
Connect to it.
Truly, like, it's so far from their lives. It's in the Arctic, which is halfway across the world.
You've never seen a polar bear in your life.
You've never known a polar bear. The polar bear is not your neighbor. It's not your cousin. It's not your friend. So people don't care about it. And this is the genuine truth. And if you want people to care about climate change, you need to show people how it impacts their life. Yeah. And this is where, as we were talking about earlier, the accelerating natural disasters from climate change are starting to show people that we are already living in a world that has been impacted, has been touched deeply by climate change. And the more and more we have these accelerating disasters, the more and more the conversation is shifting. But that's where the last piece of the puzzle starts to be really complicated. And that is that of systemic causation. And how do we understand causation with climate change? So there's a difference between probabilistic and deterministic cause. So deterministic cause being...
Hang on.
Yes.
1 second. Okay. First of all, just a random doubt. That decision for using the polar bear, who made that? Was it?
I don't know.
Yeah. So do you think there was thought behind that as well? That let us use something that is disconnected.
So I think my hypothesis is a couple things. Mm-hmm. I don't know.
Okay, sure. Yeah.
But this is what I think.
Sure.
First, I mean, climate change is a problem that started to be understood by scientists, and it was talked about in the communities of atmospheric and oceanic sciences and by ecologists and conservationists for a long time.
Right.
And I think the messaging there was bad because there's not an understanding of how to communicate necessarily all the time in the sciences.
So climate change communication was not a thing back then.
It wasn't. I don't think people gave the attention to it that it deserved.
Got it.
I think it was sort of like, this is naturally important. People have to care about this. Why aren't people caring about this, without attention to how are we talking about it in a way that makes it inaccessible or unimportant to people.
Brilliant.
And then the second thing is that in conservation, there has long been a strategy of trying to conserve, this is specific to biological conservation, trying to conserve ecosystems or places by picking a charismatic animal and having that animal being the representative of that ecosystem or place. Yeah. So for example, Save the Whales was a classic one.
Sure. Save the
But
in India, save the tiger for the forests, and yeah, I get what you mean.
right.
Yeah.
Right. So it's kind of like, okay, we need to pick a representative for climate change, and so they pick the polar bear. However, I think the problem with that is that conservation, my opinion is that kind of method of communicating conservation is a conservation for wealthy people, I think, because it doesn't make clear to people whose everyday lives are distant from the life of a polar bear or a tiger. Why?
I don't know when my next paycheck is coming. Why should I care about a polar bear?
Exactly. And not to say that, like, only wealthy people care about polar bears, but it doesn't make that concern urgent to somebody. And somebody might say, "Oh, that's sad. I hope the polar bear is okay." But it doesn't make it like a personal issue that affects you and your community.
Before our stream started, we were speaking about lung cancer and smoking. And how now in India, I'm sure across the world, it's mandatory for all cigarette boxes to have that photograph of a diseased lung. And I don't know if it is like that in the US, but over here, every cigarette box that you buy has a picture of either like a diseased lung, or somebody with oral cancer, or something very, very visually graphic, because in the hope that it connects and sends across a message. I'm not sure how successful it is, but at least the intent is there, as opposed to just putting text saying that so and so many percentage of people have been found of lung cancers have been found to be associated with smoking, because that doesn't really connect to most people, but an image might. So this idea of better communication, it just reminded me of that.
Exactly. And I think localizing images of climate change, becoming more about like people-centered, not animal-centered, more location-based. So for example, here in America, obviously the fires were a huge kind of climate communication moment, and also just the climate change when this was impacted, it's touched a lot of people's lives. But the problem is that still in the media, a lot of the coverage of the fires didn't mention climate change. Like some did and some didn't. And so making that connection between, again, climate change causes a change in probabilities. So we can't say, it's very hard to say that climate change caused a hurricane. That requires an attribution study, which takes a long time. So it's hard to say a particular event was caused by climate change. But what you can say is that it was made a certain percentage more likely, given the climate change conditions, or that forest fires in general are made a certain percentage more likely given the conditions of climate change. This is hard.
Yeah. So if I'm to bring my experience as a doctor into this, climate change becomes a pre-existing condition.
Yes.
For the world to get really sick really quickly. Right. So even in COVID-19, suppose if you have diabetes, or if you're over 60, you will get very sick. You can get very sick if you get COVID-19, and you can't say that the diabetes made you sick, but having that increases the risk of everything bad happening after that. Is it something like that? I mean, that's how I'm sort of imagining it now.
Yes,
Or
I
will say it's like just put climate change as the external shock. Instead of like your diabetes, or like all these pre-existing conditions are the pre-existing flaws in the society or the system, and then you get some external virus or something that, say for example, suppresses your immunity, or does that, then everything starts acting up. Then every small infection is going to cause a lot of damage. Every small thing is then you're going to be putting out multiple fires.
Right.
So it's more external than pre-existing condition.
Understood. Okay.
Just the flip,
basically destabilizes the whole system, and we are not very confident anymore that we can get through this, because there is an underlying flaw now in our decision. Okay, continue.
Yeah, so basically what I'm trying to say is that communicating something that's probabilistic rather than deterministic. So saying this has been made more likely by climate change is harder than saying this was caused by climate change. And oftentimes you can't say that because oftentimes the science isn't there to directly say after an event this particular thing was caused. So that communication piece becomes really difficult. And we need to develop better and more convenient language for talking about it. Basically it needs to be every time there's a disaster like this, it needs to be said that climate change made this more likely. Or if that is indeed the case, as it was with the fires. But that naming it is important.
Yeah, we don't have so it's like a circular thing that we don't have we don't have the words for it, and so we don't think of it that way, and we don't think of it that way, so we don't have the words for it. It's so language follows thought, and thought follows language, and
exactly.
It's
also like just a parallel thing, not parallel. In fact, first of all, obviously scientists have not had this training of using effective words, while at the same time there will be groups which have their own interest, which will prevent from any effective word coming into play. So will you be shocked if I say climate change is the phrase that was promoted by a Republican lobbyist?
This is true.
Worked for oil companies, or just like climate denial lobby.
Okay.
They made it change from global warming to climate change. Now, scientists who were traditionally working in this field, we did not have so much cross-disciplinary training for them to understand the implications of that.
Yeah.
For them, it was like, okay, fine, we'll use climate change and we'll go with it. But that did not work out as well.
Yeah.
Yes. So this is George Lakoff is a linguist of climate change, and I interviewed him a while ago. Or now he's not a linguist of climate change. He's a linguist, but he also applies linguistics training to understanding climate change.
Yeah.
And he brought up exactly what Viraj said. And the reason for climate change is that climate, it seems like a nice word. It's like climate, that's nice.
And change, we could say change happens. I mean, change is inevitable. Change happens. Of course. What's there to be panicking
about? Warming sounds scary.
Right.
Global warming, that sounds scary. Or like the climate crisis sounds scary.
Yeah.
And
that's true. I grew up with global warming. I don't know when it changed to climate change.
Yeah.
There was another thing that scientists accepted that change, because what happened was when they started calling it warming, and not like every year warms up. There is like, this year is cold, where is global warming? So counter that, they were like, okay, fine, we'll use change and we'll say that on an average we are warming, and it's like climate change is also causing more erratic sort of weather events. So they
went for scientific accuracy, but they lost out on impact.
Yes.
Damn.
And also that somebody else made sure that they lost on impact. So.
Right. Okay. Wow. There is so much of cognitive bias here.
Yeah.
This is the basis of climate change conversation. That what decides cognitive bias? How is language understood, and how is risk? Basically, risk. How does the brain calculate risk is something that we'll get to that. We'll take out 10 minutes and we'll talk about it. But I want to know what this slide is. Alex, can you talk about this?
I'm trying to get the slide up here.
I think I can talk about the second and third point.
Sure.
Which was, we were just talking about climate change, the word.
Yeah.
So this Spark neuroanalytics firm did a research, and they came out that we need to rebrand climate change. What they found was, if we use climate crisis instead of climate change, 60% more emotional response was received.
Yeah.
So people, climate change or even global warming for that matter, were considered neutral words. Climate crisis invoked some emotional response based on EEG and galvanic spin response. I mean, if you can talk about that, how exactly that response is measured, neuroscience way, that will be good. And also environmental destruction, when they used as a third option, it had a backfiring effect. It was too harsh for people to process rationally.
Yeah.
It sounded too crazy, too fearful.
Yeah.
So, and then that they talked about cognitive dissonance, and if you want to elaborate on
So,
these
cognitive
yeah.
dissonance is a very interesting term. So, dissonance meaning there is a split. So, there is two things are not resonating with each other. So, there is dissonance. And cognitive dissonance basically implies that you now have two states of mind that are incompatible with each other. So, on in this context, it could be as simple as an identity crisis. So, if you consider yourself as somebody who is honest, but in your job you are required to do something dishonest, you could have a cognitive dissonance, and you have to now pick one. You can, because you can only go forward with one identity if you have something which is exactly opposite. So, in this context, what I'm guessing is environmental destruction, the kind of image that it brings up is of fires everywhere, lightning, there is ruin and destruction all around, and people are dying. But around you, the reality is not that. So your brain cannot really process these two things and put it together in the same reality. So one of them has to go. And also the emotional dissonance. So environmental destruction, the kind of emotions it will invoke is of urgency, panic. And the problem with urgency and panic is that you cannot focus on your everyday things. Then you cannot be in a state of panic and still go for a date. You can't be panicking and still think of what car to buy or what shoes to wear. It doesn't fit. So then if you are in a state of dissonance, you have to pick only one of those, and obviously people will pick the ones that will make them more comfortable. So
Right.
that's, yeah. Alex?
Oh, I was just going to say that with the cognitive dissonance piece, people have this kind of bias, I think, towards a just world. Even when you see this with COVID, people are still going about their business, out in the world. And I think people have this idea that environmental destruction, I think climate change is going to happen slowly, and it does happen slowly. There are occasionally these crazy events like when the sky turns red, which are very spectacular and scary.
Yeah.
But also on the day-to-day, heat waves kill more than fires. Heat waves are the deadliest weather events.
That's what somebody was comparing the COVID crisis to. Wait, what was the stupidest thing somebody had compared to? Swimming pool deaths.
Swimming pool what?
Swimming pool deaths. Somebody said that why are we worried about COVID? More people die from drowning in swimming pools. Yeah, I mean, I'm not even going to try and rationalize it, but
but yeah, so what I'm trying to say is that there are these parts of climate change that are deadly but will feel normal. Like a heat wave isn't the same as a fire. It doesn't have the same aesthetic, but it kills people just the same, and it kills people more. And so my fear is that there will be this creeping sense of normality about climate change, just how we've normalized COVID and said that it's started to think of COVID as normal as a part of life. My fear is that climate change, the conditions of climate change will start to feel normal.
So is that oh wow, this is a very interesting. So on the one hand, we do want people to be comfortable with the changes that they have to make, because that is the only way that it can be sustainable. Right?
Yes, definitely. But we don't want to normalize dying. We don't want to normalize death. And that is my concern.
Understood.
My concern is that it will become normal for us to have these massive fires every year. And at some point we won't remember a time when we didn't have this kind of amped up destruction, or it will be normal for a bunch of people to die from heat waves. And the normalization, the naturalization of death is a part of the way that responsible parties avoid blame for their actions or for a problem. There was this really good book by a sociologist named Eric Klinenberg called Heat Wave. And And what he talks about is how it's the worst heat wave in Chicago. I think it was in the 90s. And he talks about how hundreds of people died. And the reason that hundreds of people died is because of a failure of the government to provide an intervention to prevent people from dying in the heat wave. There was all these deaths in public housing. There was limited access to medical care, very similar to COVID.
Exactly.
Just a lack of emergency response and preparation.
Yeah.
And the way that the city of Chicago avoided blame was to start to naturalize the deaths. The heat wave was a natural phenomenon. It became
It is what it
a
is.
weather event. It's a weather event and not a failure of governance, because all those people did not have to die. All these people did not have to die with COVID, and as many people will die from climate change, will not have to die. And my concern is that event will be naturalized.
Yeah, we might. So the problem with calling anything as a natural event or a natural calamity or an act of God is that it completely absolves us of all responsibility.
Mm-hmm. Both in terms of intervention and response and in terms of causality.
Yes, from both. We couldn't have prevented it, one, and now we can't do anything about it because it's not in our hands.
Yeah, just like COVID.
Just like COVID. Okay. I see that you've talked about war metaphors also here, which is very similar to climate crisis. Like it's just renaming the word for us. Viraj, is that?
Yeah. So it's like now when we talk about it's a battle for climate change, it's a war.
Right.
And what some people have, like this particular few studies at Columbia, they have this difficult conversation lab. They find that when you, not just climate change, but any issue when there is so much conflict and when people are just like in battle, at least in public space, it is difficult for people to come together and find a solution because they're always in this hyper vigilant state, because always they're always ready to fight for what they sort of believe in or what they know or what they think they believe in. So the way to resolve this is to add complexity, to educate people about how complex it is. It is not as simple. And again, it goes back to, I believe it goes back to evoking more emotional response, bringing more awareness, telling that this is just educating that how this is probabilistic and how this causes, how these things make more likely, how climate change makes extreme weather events more likely. And it's small things like, and another reason why it doesn't come up is because all the people who can normalize this are mostly have privilege to normalize this.
Yeah.
And they have the most power in the government or in the public space.
It's a loop.
So exactly. So farmer who gets, like, if our monsoons are behaving crazy, there is a connection to climate change because the climate is not as stable. It causes erratic monsoon patterns, and if there is a heavy rain in late October, the crop is gone.
Yeah.
So it has happened so many times in Maharashtra in recent years.
Correct.
I think last or year before, all the crops in Thane went sort of bust because
at the start of the conversation, I remember when I said that, oh, this is quite simple, and you said that you would like to add complexity. I think now I suddenly understood what you mean, because if you say it's very simple, then you're making it a binary situation.
Exactly.
And saying either you believe it because it's so obvious, or if you, even despite it being so obvious, if you don't believe it, then nothing can convince you.
Yeah.
But as soon as you say that, we are putting people into opposite camps, and we don't want to put people into opposite camps. So if you add more complexity, like you say that, okay, so this is all the evidence, and then it's fine if you believe in some bits and if you're still confused about some things, and we can still have a middle ground where we can keep talking, it'll probably be more effective rather than just pushing everybody into like, if you're not completely in this, then that means you're a complete denial.
Exactly.
Right. Okay. That makes sense. That makes a lot of sense. Okay.
You just need to connect and like talk more about it, and just talk more into how these all the crises are connected to, are affected by climate change or worsened by climate change. And
I read Yeah,
Yeah.
sorry, Viraj, finish the thought.
No, it's just that I just wanted to stress that how like vulnerable populations getting hit is not just in India. The Gulf, if you see the Gulf storms that hit mostly Gulf Coast, Louisiana, Houston,
Yeah,
there have been studies how black or Hispanic neighborhoods have been disproportionately being affected than
yeah,
white neighborhoods, dominantly white neighborhoods. So the thing is privilege protects you
everywhere.
so far has protected you from bad implications of climate
Yeah.
change, and that is slowing down per se the
The change,
action.
the rate of change of action,
Right,
right?
right.
I read about how what is what is the role of neurology or neuroscience in this, and there were two very interesting aspects to it. Wait, so by one sec, I think I'll just share my screen.
Yeah, I'll switch off.
Right. So there were two interesting aspects to this. One being that both climate change affects neurobiology and neurobiology affects climate change,
Mhm.
right? So wait, why can't I see you? Oh yeah, there you are. So both, it affects, it's like a bi-directional thing. And the way that neurobiology affects climate change is basically in risk estimation. So your brain trying to control risk, so both cognitive and emotional risk. And there is this quote by Daniel Kahneman on so in his book Thinking Fast and Slow, about how we always perceive known knowns. So we think of the things that we know for sure, and we would prefer dealing with that more than the things that we know we don't know. And the things that we don't know, we obviously will not even, it will not even come into our calculation. That there is a possibility that there may be things we don't know, we won't even think about it. But climate change sort of comes under the known unknowns for a lot of people, because they know that this is there, but they don't really know how bad it is. And they prefer not to think about it. They would much rather think about the problems that come under the known. So they know that their rent is due, they know that they have to pay their kids bills, so these are all known problems. So they would much rather keep dealing with this. And the most interesting thing for me is the biases. So I mean, I'm sorry that this is, I've just made notes here, but the first bias was the availability bias, and we spoke about it last week when we talked of unlearning. And the whole concept of the availability bias is that we will always make so-called logical decisions based on things that we've most recently heard. So we think that we are very reasonable people, but then if now, since we spoke so much about climate change, the chat, whoever has been listening will go and make decisions based on this. But then if next week they hear some fresh piece of information which sort of contradicts this, then that will be more stronger in their memory, and that will be a bigger factor in their decision making, which is why it is sort of important to keep talking about it. So that is the first thing. And another bias is the optimism bias, which is that invariably, no matter how bad things sound, collectively we may think that, yeah, the world is screwed, society is going down, everything is worse than how things were. But for an individual, for me, myself, I will always believe that my life is going to get better. It's just the way that the brain is wired, that you will always have hope that even if the world goes to hell, my life, my future is going to get sorted. Because from an evolutionary perspective, that is important for me to wake up in the morning, to get out to work, to have a sense of purpose in life. the brain takes a lot of effort to give you that optimism, even if it is not based on any data. There is no proof that your life is going to get better, but you will still believe your life is going to get better. So that is the optimism bias. And the third bias that I came
Also,
across, yeah, tell.
just may I
Yeah,
on the
yeah, please,
optimism
please.
bias,
Yes.
there is also one more thing that when I say that we need to add complexity
Hmm.
is because when I say that I work in climate change,
Yeah.
it is I always tell this, I'm selfish. I'm not doing it for you. I'm not doing it for anybody.
Right.
I'm doing it for my progeny.
Hmm.
I'm doing it for my species or my because I know I'm aware of the complexity because I know my micro action is going to contribute to an aggregate bad action, is
Right.
going to contribute and come back to me as a feedback. So I am not doing it for somebody else.
Yeah.
So if you make aware people of this complexity and
Yeah.
these feedback loops on a system level, that how you do contributes to everything, and then how you demand how you treat your companies or how you demand actions from government that contributes to bigger actions, and then eventually they affect you. Like I don't care, I mean, I, not to sound ruthless,
No,
but
no.
i I like tigers, but I don't care about tigers because tigers.
Yeah.
I care about tigers because they are part of an ecosystem whose
Exactly.
balance is required for me to sustain or my species to sustain in a long time.
Yeah.
So a tiger can take a
It's
hike for all I care, but they
yeah.
should be there
It's a
for them.
very, very
Yeah,
important point because uh, when we think about teamwork, say if you are at a corporate job, or say if you are in a football team and you are, say, a striker, then if you go back and you help your defender, it doesn't mean that you are not being selfish because you want to win the game. So you cannot say that I am a striker and I'm not going to do anything else because you will not win the game. So what is your end goal? To
right.
just go around running with the ball, or are you planning to win the game? And this is again, when it comes to game theory, it's sort of that infinite sum versus zero sum game.
I was just going to say that it's a free rider problem.
Yes.
People think that, hey, since if we as a society decide to install solar or do something collectively, right?
Yeah.
And then I was like, okay, it's okay if I don't contribute. The other 90% are going to contribute and I'm going
Exactly.
to reap the benefits of it.
Yeah.
So there is that part also. It's like, so all these things also get into become part of consideration when you start designing policies.
Right.
How to avoid free riders, how to punish them free riders so that
Hmm.
everybody acts. So all these societal mechanisms of punishing free riders, it's same common to
So,
climate change related policy also.
Alex, when you did your project on communication, how much did these questions come up? The question of biases and cognitive biases and the way human behavior is, because each one of these biases has a neuroscientific principle, an evolutionary goal. They all came. We didn't invent them. They were already there. So
Yeah.
yeah. How much did you discuss this? How much is this a part of the climate change conversation?
I mean, so my particular project was focusing on deadlines. So
Hmm.
like the communication of deadlines as a way of motivating climate action. So like this whole like 10 years to save the world kind of thing, whether that's motivates people or if people find that scary,
Right.
or whether that actually like activates people or not. And I think a big part of the work in climate communication right now is trying to understand how to mobilize these biases that we have in order to get people to care about climate change. So
Hmm.
the hope versus fear question is a very relevant one. So
Right.
like you said, hope is an evolutionary motivator for people to act and get things done.
Yeah.
But the question of whether a hopeful picture of climate change or a scary picture of climate change, which one of those is more motivating to people, that's a big area of research in climate communications. But I will say is that for most of my reading, what I found is that different messages work for different groups.
Yes.
And messaging really has to be culturally and contextually based. So understanding that an evangelical Christian living in the American South is going to have a very different, is going to require a very different message than maybe like a farmer living in the countryside of India.
Yes.
Like those two people are different people with different worldviews, different beliefs, different cultural and individual contexts, and you can't expect the same message to work for everybody.
Exactly. The idea of bias is basically acknowledging that communication is not a one-way street. It's not just about who is saying what, it's also about who is listening. And words don't have any inherent meaning. So you have to intend something, but then I also have to be in that frame of mind to take it the way you intended. Because if I am from a different frame of mind, then I will distort that same word or the same sentence and hear something else in my mind. So what is leaving your mouth is not what is entering my head. So that is the basis
we're constantly,
yeah.
Yeah, I was just saying we're constantly mediating every piece of information that we receive through our
Exactly.
own, filtering it through our own cultural and personal worldviews.
Yes.
And I think that's also something powerful, because that means that there's lots of messages that are potentially out there. And then also too, who the communicator is matters a lot.
It's someone you trust, someone you, that makes a big role.
A trusted messenger. So like you to your audience, I imagine.
I don't know. I'm the idea that I am trying to push here is, let's think about things. Let's not take anything just like that. Let's think about things, and from a personal sense, let's bring neuroscience into it, because I feel that neuroscience is like a great leveler. Because once we go there, once we go into the neural networks, it doesn't matter if you're white, black, it doesn't matter which country, which religion, it doesn't matter. It's inherently the same. We are literally the same. All cognitive biases are the same. All fundamental evolutionary drives are the same. So it's a good starting point to discuss a lot of things.
It's also interesting because the neuroscience tells us too that the cultural context does matter. So if you're a Trump supporter and Trump tells you to drink bleach because it will cure COVID, you might go drink bleach. That's what.
God!
That's what I was going to ask you a question in that sense also.
Yeah.
Is that because when you go and talk, so because of the social media and because of the way right now is, what has happened is that we have much bigger identities now. That what we somehow, Facebook promoted this thing, what we post on wall is my identity.
Yes.
So now what my beliefs about climate change has suddenly become my identity.
Yes.
And that identity is tied to the fact that I voted for Trump in last election, or I'm a Republican, or I believe in religion and I don't believe in science, or so
it's all they've all become interconnected. And it's like joining, if you join one club, then you automatically gain membership into a dozen other clubs, even though you may not have decided.
Right, exactly.
Right.
And I think the way to tackle this is to increase complexity and make a room for it. Like just add complexity and make the identity shaky.
Yes.
And strip down to, your identity should not be what you believe in, some fact or information.
And it should not be interdependent. So it shouldn't be that just because you're religious, so therefore you are Republican, or therefore you are a climate change denier. And what they're doing is they are stringing together all these identities to make it that if you buy into one, it's like an Apple ecosystem. You buy an iPhone and 5 years later you own 15 Apple devices, which is my personal life story. But the idea is that identity should not be like that. We should have the freedom of choice to look at evidence and decide for each thing. Like, just you could be a Democrat who could be a climate change denier, or you could be a Republican who is a climate change believer, or you could be religious and not, so on and so forth. Identity should not be interdependent. And
I believe that people.
Yeah, tell me.
Oh, I was just gonna say, I believe that people are capable of massive complexity as well. Like just as much as people buy into multiple clubs when they label themselves as a Trump supporter or Republican, people have multiple identities at the same time.
Yes.
So I think that part of the key challenge with climate change communication is pulling on the strings that are available to make people understand. So for example, like a religious person, a deeply religious person for example, in a conservative evangelical community might not buy into climate change because that's incompatible with their political beliefs. However, if you start to talk about it with a frame of like stewardship of God's earth, for example, that might appeal to the religious identity more in a way that overrides kind of like a political identity. So I think that these things are definitely capable of contradictions and these like kind of thorny spaces which make room for people to expand their view.
But that is the fundamental truth about the human experience, that it is complicated and it is thorny. And the reason that we are all able to live with ourselves is because of cognitive biases, or to put it more bluntly, hypocrisy. We all have a fundamental amount of hypocrisy going on to protect ourselves from these thorny conflicts that are there in our identities. So, because evangelical supporting Trump is crazy to me, because I mean, there is so much dissonance there, but people are doing it. They are able to manipulate their thoughts and make it coexist. Yeah.
Also, I also think that people I'll use a softer word than hypocrisy. I'll say that people are just scared, because reality is reality.
Yeah.
There are things that are people. It's not. People are not blind. People know that things are going wrong.
Yeah.
And there is just like, and there are artificial, again, there are these other forces who are keeping the voice suppressed. So for example, there is up in Santa Barbara, there is a professor of political science who did a study which showed that conservative states, which the governors or the senators who vote against climate bills, people in those states actually believe climate change is real. The problem is that most of what those government or senators are hearing are what lobbyists are speaking.
Right.
Because the power or the ability to reach or access to power is limited to few people. It is not to everybody. And that paper was actually kind of blew maybe many people's minds, that how is this possible? But many people feel that there are things going wrong. It's not, they are not oblivious to them.
Then the question comes is that how were they voted into power? And that if
because the politicians play with the fear.
Right.
They tap into that fear and then they put it in camps.
Right. It's but I do love this the last point that we raised about how human beings are complex, and it's okay to bring back complexity and convince people that because of your XYZ beliefs doesn't mean that you shouldn't be supporting climate change sustainability, because that is, I mean, logically that should be the one thing that unites us all. Like the pandemic, it's crazy that we thought that this would unite us all because this is a common problem. But even here, if we can find differences, and people saying I won't wear masks, which is insane to me. So that has spread to Bombay, by the way. So today there was a anti-mask.
Really?
There was an anti-mask protest at Marine Drive, and people holding up boards of how Bill Gates has. Oh my God, it's insane. It's
wow.
Yeah. So if we can do that, if we can do something, if we can get divided over because of a virus, there is no end to human imagination for sure. The one thing I would say is, so you said religion, right? And so I recently started reading Bhagavad Gita, and one of the reason I did that was curiosity. I wanted to know what it was saying and the lessons that it had and all, and I was trying to understand it from a neuroscience perspective. But also that I realized that it is very similar to this. We don't give any room for somebody. We have built these very tight walls, saying that okay, if you are religious, therefore you are non-scientific. It's a bias. We are being pushed into that conversation space where these two things cannot coexist. Now the problem is that if somebody is religious but is scientific, then the scientific community will say, oh, you're religious, okay, you can go there now, don't sit with us. And I mean, I'm obviously exaggerating, but this is a gradual process that is happening. And if we what we really need is a common room. Like in schools, we need a common room where everyone can just come and hang out and talk and communicate. Because for people in power, nothing is better than isolation rooms where everybody has echo chambers, everybody is just talking to each other, and the more secure the echo chambers are, the more easily everyone can be controlled. It's just the way it
Yes,
is.
exactly.
Yeah.
Yeah, and that's why I think that interfaith movements around climate change can be so powerful. I mean,
Yeah.
like, there's an organization here in the US called Interfaith Power and Light, which is a faith-based organization that organizes around a bunch of different things, climate change being one of the central ones.
Right.
And they've done amazing work in my hometown, like, for example, mobilizing faith leaders to oppose a pipeline that's supposed to go in through northern Minnesota that transports tar sands,
Right.
oil from Canada into the US. So stuff like this, where you're mobilizing a community around a faith-based community around climate action, I think is really exciting.
It's amazing.
For that exact reason.
Yeah. Like finding common ground. Like that's the basis of every cooperation, right? Like you find common ground and then you work on that.
Also, not just common ground, I feel like we have immense capacity for empathy. And
Yeah.
I just feel like the way to increase complexity is stories.
Yeah.
The side that doesn't, because finding stories and bringing into a public sphere takes effort. But
Yeah.
we, as a researcher, I mean, Alexandria will also agree to this, and I personally believe strongly that I cannot be working on climate change from my lab, from my computer.
It has to
I
be out
have
there.
to go out there. I have to listen to stories. I have to tell those stories to other people, and I have to
Absolutely.
tell them what the story. I mean, it just that empathy. And what you were saying, the religious, all faiths have empathy.
Yes.
There is no religion that does not preach empathy.
Correct.
There is no religion that does not preach that we should care for each other, we should care for the planet or the well-being.
Yeah.
So stories is a way to evoke empathy and
Lovely.
add complexity,
Yes.
I feel.
That's I can't agree more. I can't add anything to that. Thank you. I think we will wrap up the conversation. I think it's been lovely talking to both of you. Alex, thank you so much for joining in. It's an absolute
Thank you for
pleasure.
having us.
Viraj, thank you so much for connecting with Alex and suggesting that we do this topic. I really enjoyed it. Chat, how are you doing? Please ask the panel about flat earthers. Dude, I don't want to. I mean, we had such a nice discussion. What do I even ask you about? No, it's okay. He showed a diagram where the earth is surrounded. Like, अभी क्या flat earth के बारे में बोलेंगे?
It's just like, I feel like knowledge is a privilege. So it's not available to everybody. I just today on Instagram, I saw some reel where a 80-year-old gentleman saw the sea for the first time.
Yeah.
After 80 years of existence. So
Yeah.
as much as we assume knowledge or access to knowledge,
Yeah.
I mean, people don't know. I mean, we are just like, I think those with access to internet are 1.5% of the population.
Damn, dude. Yeah.
That's just, we can't assume. And that's where empathy should come into play for all of us.
Correct.
Who try to convey these, or who try to teach, educate. We have to do 70% listening and 30% then responding. That's the only way.
That's a lovely. I love that, dude. I love that conclusion. It's so true though, because our instinctive urge to dismiss, say, oh, these people are so stupid. How can you think the earth is flat? It is so obvious. It doesn't get us anywhere. it's not, again, if you're talking of that attacker and defender, they are still in our team at some point. So at some point we do have to learn to play, and yeah, it's not going to happen without communication. So I really love that empathy point. Amazing, amazing. Okay, Sydney Paul Koldia, what? No, I don't get that. Miss Nonchalant, seriously, we lose track of time. I know, today we got very, like, 11:30, 2 hours. Anyway.
2 hours?
2 hours, yeah, I know. I didn't realize.
I need coffee.
This was a lovely conversation. Chad, I hope you enjoyed it. I hope you learned a lot. I did, for sure. Okay. Where can we find the notes? So this notes I'll share on Discord. Tomorrow morning I'll share it on the channel, and you can find it there.
I can send the slides also if
yes,
you want
please.
to upload.
Yes, please. Yeah, just send it to me, and I'll put up that as well. Okay. I think that we've covered all the points. You guys were awesome. I really enjoyed myself. Thank you.
Thank you for
Thank you
having
so
us.
much.
Yes. Okay.
We love
so
talking about this.
amazing. Okay. You guys stay right there. I'm just going to end the stream. Chat, I shall see you on the next live stream. Wait, when is that? Wait, what is today? Today is
Sunday.
Today is Sunday. We have coding part 2. Okay, guys, Wednesday night we are learning coding, and we are going to talk about GitHub, and we are going to talk about how to make your own website. So that'll be fun. So chat, I shall see you guys on Wednesday. See you. You guys are awesome. Okay, that was all.